mechanism less efficient, or would it reduce the protection for U.S. companies? What is the threat there to U.S. companies?
Andy, let me see if I can get a little bit more for you on the specifics of the message being given, but certainly to make clear that if there's an application to WIPO then and the Palestinians become WIPO members, that it will trigger the same kind of funding cutoff. So already the organization will have less money to work with, but also that it could diminish our influence within WIPO, which has been very important to these companies.
Quite apart from the congressional law, you're opposed to the Palestinians having membership in the World Intellectual Property Organization?
We are.
You are? Because Palestinians don't have any intellectual property, or because their intellectual property, because they're not a state, is somehow less protectable or less worthy of protection?
Because this is a cascade effect of the decision in the UNESCO, which we consider
what does protecting intellectual
premature.
property have to do anything to do with statehood?
It has to do with the declaration of state status in UNESCO, which cascades into WIPO that we are opposed to.
You know, I used to think that this government, my government, had some intellect itself, but this just seems ridiculous. You are going to oppose them in some kind of international weather organization as well, the Civil Aviation Organization?
Our position on this with regard to all the UN agencies is the same.
You think that there's somewhere in this building that someone can draw a intellectually responsible and acceptable argument that membership in the World Intellectual Property Organization should not be granted to the Palestinians because they are not a state, because their intellectual property, because they're not a state, is somehow less deserving of protection than anyone else's, including the Syrians, including whoever else. Right?
Matt, the move here is not with regard to the aspiration that we all have for the Palestinians to have access to and full rights of all of these UN organizations. The concern here is trying to shortcut the process of statehood, trying to establish statehood through the back door. Can I finish my point, please?
Yeah.
Thank you. Rather than establishing true statehood the way it has to be done, which is in direct negotiations with their neighbor. And from that can flow all of the benefits of these organizations.
But not even the Palestinians themselves say that this is a way to statehood.
Well, what has been granted
they know
here,
that this does not mean statehood.
What has been granted here in UNESCO is Palestinian membership and statehood status. That's what's of concern.
I'm sorry, and the Palestinian vote on that?
Excuse me?
The Palestinians didn't vote for this. 107 other countries, including some of your best friends, voted for this. The Palestinians didn't vote for it. They just simply put it up for they put it up for a vote. They didn't have a vote in this.
This began.
You lost.
Matt,
why?
Are you asking me a question that you'd like me to answer, or are you just going to have an argument with me today?
No, I want to know why you think, and everyone else which is a position that everyone else disagrees with, that this is somehow that this hurts the peace process or hurts the ability of the Palestinians to get a state, short of just upsetting the Israelis.
Start with the premise. This process in UNESCO began with a Palestinian petition for membership, which we thought was ill-advised and ill-considered, and which we so said to the Palestinians at the time. So the Palestinians made a move here that we didn't think was conducive to the environment for the talks or conducive to getting us back to the table. That is our concern. We want to get the Palestinians their state. It's only going to happen if we can get these parties back to the table. We have to create an environment that gets them back to the table, and this is not helpful.
Okay, but you accept that 107 countries disagreed with you.
107 countries made their own decision. We disagree with them.
Right, exactly. So, I mean, doesn't that tell you anything? That if you add in the abstentions, which included the Brits, your special ally, who abstained, that 159 countries disagree with you.
It tells us that we are not any closer to a Palestinian state by virtue of this vote today. We are trying to get to that end state that we want, that the Palestinians want, and we don't think this is helpful.
Did the Secretary have any personal diplomacy on this subject? Did she make any calls to Brits, French, whoever, in recent days, specifically regarding this UNESCO vote?
The Secretary's been making the case personally against this move in the UN agencies for weeks and weeks and weeks, and she had many, many conversations about this, particularly when we were in New York.
Do you have any update on your efforts to bring both parties to the table? And what about the meetings or the meeting that Undersecretary, Deputy Secretary Knights had today with Tony Blair?
I don't have anything for you on the Tony Blair meeting. If we have anything to report, we'll get it to you tomorrow. I think you know where we are, that we had, Quartet had separate meetings with the parties last week. We have encouraged both parties now to go back and start working on concrete proposals for each other on land and on security. We will be working in quartet format with each of the parties, and our aspiration still is to have them present real meaty proposals to each other within the 90-day time clock from when this meeting happened last week.
Has the UNESCO vote changed or quickened the pace of lobbying at the UN mission in New York to prevent a vote for statehood in the GA?
You know, I think the UNSC process is moving apace. They're still at the stage of analyzing the request, gathering information, etc.
Today marks a milestone. It's the 20th anniversary of the Madrid process, the Madrid Peace Conference, begun exactly 20 years ago. And during that time, there was a great deal of intense negotiations and some stoppages and so on, and other processes, and many agreements. Yet the settlements have gone on throughout all this time, although the United States position was expressed very clearly at the time that settlements must stop. Yet they go on. Do you have a position today reflecting on all the settlement processes over the past 20 years?
Well, let me first say that we've also been working for peace for 20 years, and it remains a challenge. But our position on settlements hasn't changed, and we continue to make it. Anything else on this subject, or can we move on?
If we just take it just a bit further, what incentive should the Palestinians have today when they see that a great deal of the land initially allocated for their state has been gobbled up by settlement? What incentive should they have to go back to negotiations?
I think the Secretary has said this best when she said that only when borders are settled is it going to be absolutely clear where they are. So if you want all of this to be settled, you have to go back to the negotiating table. And you have to, before that, present your own proposals on land and security. So that's what we're asking the Palestinians to do. If they are concerned, as we are, by what is going on, then come back to the table and let's get firm borders.
Why wouldn't the United States then take the initiative and call for a peace conference to actually discuss the borders of the Palestinian state, period?
Because we don't think, and our quartet partners don't think, and frankly the parties don't think, that having a big conference is going to get us any closer. We think that the next step ought to be concrete proposals by each side on borders and on security. This will give the Palestinians an opportunity to present to the Israelis, and for the Israelis to present to the Palestinians what they think the right answers are. That'll allow us to see how close we are, allow us to see how we can move the process forward. That's the right way to get closer to a state in secure borders.
So it's sticking to this 90-day process that was worked out last week for both sides to come up with proposals.
Correct.
Just on the cascade effect. If it does happen, presumably the votes will be similar to the one in UNESCO, because you are in a distinct minority in pretty much every UN group in which you don't have a veto, although you're in a minority there as well. You seem to be admitting that the Palestinians have you over a barrel here. They can, if they continue to go to these various agencies, force the United States to withdraw into almost a shell by, maybe not immediately, but if you get kicked out of UNESCO for having not paid your dues in 2 years, I expect that the other organizations have similar rules, and so you will have shrunk your international outreach, correct?
I'm not going to get too far down the tracks here. We are trying to make clear what the implications for us, what the implications for these organizations are of the move that the Palestinians started here. And we are hoping that this will end here and we can get back to the peace talks, because that is the place where we're going to be able to achieve the aspirations of the Palestinian people. I mean, one of the things that's most distressing about all of this is that not a single thing changes on the ground for a single Palestinian. Life does not get better as a result of what's happened in UNESCO. And that's been our concern from the beginning. If you care about quality of life for Palestinians and they're having their own state, this is not the way to go.
Well, I don't want to get back into this, but the whole fact that nothing changes on the ground is exactly the argument that people make for this isn't such a, for saying that this is not such a big deal and bad deal. But I want to get back to this. The Palestinians seem to have acted shrewdly here. No?
We disagree. We disagree.
Why? You're
For the
going to
reasons that
lose
I've
your
s-
influence in UNESCO because of this, which you.
Because it doesn't get them any closer to the state that they want, that they need, that they deserve. And it does exacerbate tensions in the region, which makes it harder to get back to the table. And it certainly doesn't help our ability to help them through UNESCO, which does support cultural heritage sites in the Palestinian territories and throughout the Middle East. So we think it's a mistake. Can we move on? Moving on, please.
Turkey, on Friday, the Pentagon announced that they were providing some humanitarian aid for the earthquake. They said, the spokesman said they were doing so in coordination with the State Department, and I wanted to know what state is doing, also what the Turkish government has asked for. Thank you.
Well, first of all, the Turkish government has put out a general appeal for assistance. So in that context, in the first instance, we talked about this last week, we have provided $300,000 in humanitarian assistance through the Turkish Red Crescent and other Turkish aid authorities. The Pentagon is also providing certain excess equipment in the humanitarian categories. For example, some winterized tents have gone. I actually don't have the full list here in front of me, but it's things like tents, medical supplies, other things that one traditionally needs as winter comes in an earthquake environment. And these are coming from European Command.
Is USAID providing anything as well, or sending a team or anything?
USAID is working with the Turkish Red Crescent and other NGOs to ensure that the $300,000 that we are providing is being used to the best advantage. Other things, please, Michel.
President Assad has said yesterday, or has warned, that foreign intervention in his country would cause an earthquake that would burn the whole region. Do you have any reaction to that?
Well, my first reaction would be to say that President Assad, if he cared about the future of his country, would take the steps that we've been calling for. He would step aside so that a true democratic dialogue could begin. But even before that, he would withdraw his heavy weapons from cities and towns across Syria, which are intimidating people. He would stop arresting, beating, keeping locked up and torturing peaceful protesters, and he would allow a true dialogue to begin. That's what the Arab League has called for. That's what we have repeatedly called for. And as we've said repeatedly, nobody wants to further militarize the situation in Syria. On the contrary, we want the violence to end. We want a true dialogue about a non-sectarian, democratic, peaceful future for Syria to begin. And it is Assad himself who is standing in the way of that. It is Assad himself who is not listening to the Arab League or anybody in the neighborhood who is, who sees what's going on, and all of us abhor the violence. So he needs to get on the side of his people.
Do you support the Arab League's proposal to Syria?
Well, certainly, were Assad to listen to the Arab League and take the steps that they have asked for, including immediate withdrawal of weaponry from the cities, an immediate end to the tortures, to the arrests, to the abuses, and immediate access to Syria for international monitors, including from the Arab League itself, the situation would improve. He seems unwilling to do that. From our perspective, that would be a first step. We obviously also want to see a real democratic dialogue begin, and we want to see Assad step aside.
Is the United States taking any special measures, as this was a especially violent and bloody weekend this past weekend? Are there any special measures that you are taking, or initiatives that you are taking in coordination with other countries, especially China and Russia?
Well, it certainly was, as you said, Saeed, a very bloody weekend. By our count, at least 70 civilians were killed in Syria.